The motivation behind my future fellowship is the fact that there is currently a major gap or a disconnect between paleoecology and management or the real users of this kind of data set. And if you look at this study here, it's showing that one of the reasons people or practitioners don't really use phyloecological data is a lack of interest. Some don't even understand what the data set is saying. So this study was done in the UK, surveying, getting information from people working in the Wildlife Trust, the Woodland Trust, conservation agencies like that, and we can see they don't really know what phyloecological data set is actually conveying, and they don't even know how to interpret it or how to use it. And one of my favorite article, putting the dead to work, has also sort of shown that for us to effectively manage or conserve biodiversity going into the future, there is no way we can exclude geohistorical data or paleoecological data or paleobiological data, however you want to, describe that. But currently, a lot of management, biodiversity management framework is largely based on, current vegetation survey or ecosystem survey, experimental designs, and modeling. So this part is usually overlooked, and that's what actually sort of motivated my future fellowship project. And in addition to that, after working in Australia, one of the things I've also, experienced there or sort of seen is the effect of bushfire and how, the government is going about that, the conflict between the government and their indigenous people, how conservation is not considering indigenous knowledge in developing fire management practices or fire management framework. And also, usually, when we conduct paleoecological work, like the traditional way as it has been done over the last 50 years, you go to the site, you say you collaborate with the land managers or with the conservationists, but you go to the site, you get a sediment course, and then you publish the paper and just say we thank blah 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 for giving us access to the site. That's it. The person or the conservationist, the practitioner don't get to actually engage with the data set, they don't get to contribute. So those are major barriers of which you need to actually engage with these people to then, design your data set or interpret it in a way that will be meaningful to them. So those are the things that sort of inspired or sort of motivated the future fellowship work. So those biases are there, and the goal of the project is to bridge that gap. Um, Connecting both indigenous people and land managers, conservation practitioners, connecting with them, asking them the pressing, issues and how paleoecological data sets can actually be of use in that context, and also to try as much as possible and target the research interpretation, the research presentation to specific need on ground. So rather than trying to sort of use the scattergun approach, but actually ask, what are you doing at the moment? What would you like to get from this data set? So that would determine where we actually collect the core samples from. And to give you an example of that is, for instance, if I go to a site that is really of high scientific interest and I get a sediment core or a peat core that goes back to the last 100,000 years. That is usually what we look for as a paleoecologist, because if you publish that, it's going to make the mainstream science. Maybe you get it to, Nature or PNAS or something like that. But if the conservation agencies decide they're not interested in the last 100,000 years, they only want to know what happened in the last 200 years, I'm going to ditch that core and go for the last 200 years, because that is what is relevant. What's the point of publishing what will end up as a literature review rather than what is going to be really used as a framework? So that's the whole thing about the project. And in terms of local knowledge or indigenous knowledge, it would involve both direct consultations with local stakeholders. So local stakeholders in this case would be people like the Wildlife Trust, the Woodland Trust in the UK, and in places like Canada and Australia, West Africa, where I'm working, we'll be talking with the local community, sometimes with the chiefs, indigenous representatives in Tasmania or in Australia. So it will be in that category. And in cases where that is not possible, we then delve into archaeological record to see what we can find to make the whole interpretation of the paleoecological data set as holistic as possible without bias. Okay, and so this will involve a lot of sites across the world, and there will be a focus on wetlands, including swamps, and which is a special interest to me, and it will include sites in the UK, Australia, West Africa, Canada, and that list might be growing. So, what is one of the things that is determining the study side is that those that are actually interested in that kind of data set, where we can actually learn from how they will be able to use palaeoecological data set, and then perhaps we'll be able to develop a framework that will then be useful in other sites across the globe. Okay, so the work in the UK, there are multiple sites I'm working on in the UK, but the Great Fen is what I'll be talking about today, and it was funded originally by the Isaac Newton Trust. It was designed. I'm just gonna stay here so I don't stamp my face. So the Great Fen work was it was meant to be like a preamble to the future leader fellowship to see what we can actually get there, the kind of proxies that are well preserved in the environment, and it was funded by the Isaac Newton Trust. And now that I got the Future Leader Fellowship, so they are paying for my time, and it's in collaboration directly with the Wildlife Trust for Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, and Northampton or Northam, whatever. So the Great Fen is like one of the largest peat fen in the UK. I think the first one is the one in Suffolk. It's an important site which sort of promotes high biodiversity, and some unique species in the UK are present in that environment. And a lot of things are happening there aside from the ecological value. There's a lot of community visits, you have science, education going on there. But unfortunately, it has been largely drained over the last 200 years. And this was in 23 when we were there. So this is the home fen post, the popular one. So the peat usually, used to be there. Just to give you an idea of how much peat has actually been drained, and the site today is like even below the sea level. And so what the Wildlife Trust are actually doing there, they're trying to buy up, degraded peatland, degraded farmland, or farmed peat. They're trying to buy those up and see if they can actually restore them back to their glory. So restoration in this case is not necessarily restoring what was there, thousands of years ago, but to restore something that looks like a wetland or a fenland habitat. So they are buying up multiple lands and trying to sort of promote that kind of wetland mosaic landscape in the area. So in terms of previous work done in the Fens, there's been a lot of work, archaeological work, and then work on cultural history and so on and so forth. But as palaeoecology is concerned, or ecology, I'd say like there are very few studies in the area, and the main one was by Sir Harry Godwin, which he did a very long time ago. He did the polling work in a stratigraphic context, looking at the different stratigraphic layers of peat and the kind of vegetation that characterize the fenland through time in the broader sense. And this project as well, which this was done by Steve Bowman for Clover and Clark 2013, it was more in the geological context, so where they're just sort of mapping where is peat, where is clay, where is gravel across the landscape. So this is the kind of work that's been done in the area so far, but there's still a lot of opportunity to do more that would benefit the kind of projects the Wildlife Trust are actually undertaking in the area. So, we know there is peat there, but we don't know how much carbon is in the peat. And usually because you have a deep peat, doesn't necessarily translate to high carbon food or high carbon sink. So we have no idea. And the chronology of the work in this area is also sort of patchy, because the last work was done even before the first calibration curve was released in 2013. So and of course, we can, even though the polling work has been done, there is still a lot to do because it's such a massive area, and I don't think few points, the 2 to 3 data points is enough to represent the floristic characteristics of the landscape. There will be some variability across space and time. So the goal of this current work is then to fill those knowledge gaps, to quantify the carbon, look at floristic changes through time in terms of biodiversity, floristic diversity at different scales, the species diversity, the beta diversity, and of course see if we can separate the potential role of people and climate in shaping the landscape, and if there is something we can learn from how people interacted with the fen in the past that actually sort of promoted biodiversity, if there is something we can learn from that, and then we can transfer it to the modern day farming practices in the area for sustainable farming. And of course, in the process, we'll be able to also improve the chronology of important timing of events in the area in the past. And because this is all geared towards what the Wildlife Trust are doing in the area today. So they decide where we actually took the calls from. So they send us the coordinates like, okay, this is the farm we've just bought. We want you to take the calls from there. Even though it was very difficult to take calls from drain side, it was really difficult, but it is what it is. That's what they wanted. So we ended up taking some short calls, some 80 centimeters, some 100 centimeters, but so far that's what they really want. Yeah, that floats my boat. And to give you an idea of what they are doing, so this is an artistic impression of one of the farms that we took the course from presently, and those brown shaded areas are like farmed land. And what they would like to see in the future, maybe in the next 10, 15 years, or at least from 5 years, in 5 years' time, they want to see the landscape to be something like that will promote biodiversity and also would attract people to actually come and all over Cambridgeshire to come to the site to enjoy bird watching, walking, hiking, and things like that. So that's the whole goal for the Great Fen. And again, I would also be going to them, to their office, would have like a discussion forum where would also explore further where the findings would be able to benefit their ongoing 5-year initiative as well as the community. And there is also plan to like identify the key landscapes we find in our record and then put that into an illustration or like artwork or painting, and then that would be in the exhibition room at the Welcome the Visitor Center. So that will sort of help the community to also sort of engage with the landscape to understand that this place that you're standing on in New Decoy, so this community center is planned to be built in New Decoy. So they know here that the community center is built, it used to be like this. So those are the kind of things that we're planning to do more in the area. And what's next is that I'm going back there next week because the last time we were there, like I mentioned, it was difficult to call the peat and the water table was just there, but we need the water table to actually be somewhere there. So we hope that with the winter rainfall, by the time we get there next week, the water table will be somewhere there. Hopefully we'll be able to go deeper and call newer sites in the area. And of course, more polling records are still being analyzed. I think, yeah, it's a big work, and 2-3 polling records would even be enough. So we just need to keep analyzing more polling record as much as possible, more sites, looking at the spatial changes in carbon, and more sites as well. And of course, get more information from the Wildlife Trust regarding the local cultural history and the last 50, 100 years. And so all of this then, again, goes back to the whole fellowship project and that kind of approach to working with the practitioners or the conservationists would then be sort of replicated depending on the goal of conservation or restoration work in different sites across the world. And currently in the UK, I'm also working in North Wales and the Lake District, and they also have different questions they are trying to tackle with palaeocology. So all of the palaeocology work will all be geared towards those individual questions. And with that, I would like to thank the funding agencies as well as everyone who contributed to the work in the field, in the lab. And I'll say thank you.